At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES Podcast, episode number 285. As always, these are your two hosts. I am Greg. He is Joe.
Hello.
And we're covering a game that we don't remember exactly who picked this episode, to be honest, because it probably it could have either been could have either been either one of us because both of us have an interest in these franchises. But we're covering the Super NES version of Robocop versus the Terminator episode, and I say version because unlike other ports, there actually are sizable differences between this and the Genesis version of the game, which we'll cover in the podcast, I'm sure. But I had no experience, so I had no experience at all with this game before going to the podcast. I knew about the comic book series that was based upon, but I never had read it. Joe was kind enough to provide the first four issues of the comic to read. So I had some. So I was able. So like I read that to prep for doing all this. But
so we can go back and forth for reciting the panels and just do a full on talking play of this. Okay, cool.
Joe, did you have any experience with either version of this game before?
So I had experience with the Genesis version. Growing up, so. I can't remember how I came about this game because I only had the cart. So this might have been one of those I borrowed from a friend and then forever kept it, which is possible. That happened a lot back in the 90s and 80s. But yeah, I somehow acquired this. I know that there are amazing cases for this game that were actually physically released where they're like thick plastic and etched out with the little blocks of the chip for the T800, which is pretty awesome.
You mean for the Super NES release, right?
So I think they did the same for the Genesis release, but yes, specifically the Super Nintendo release I'm talking about. Okay,
yeah, because I was going to say because the European Mega Drive cover is just pretty basic. It's just like a mashup of the two movie posters.
Oh, okay.
The Super NES Box is very cool looking and goes for a lot of money on eBay, which we'll talk about here later on. I did not know the Genesis version also came that same way because that's
like I said, I believe it did. I only had a cart, so
okay. Well, the game actually was developed by different companies depending upon like what version of the game you're talking about here, because the game did come up with multiple systems. So, probably a little bit before we get into that, just some more bit of background. We're going to assume everybody here knows, at least in passing, what Robocop and Terminator is, especially since how both these franchises were very big at the time period, and how both of them are still somewhat relevant today. I mean, we have had fairly recent movies in both franchises, so so I'm going to assume everybody here at least knows what's up with those. So I was very surprised to hear about a mashup back in the day because it's like the other big mashup was Alien vs Predator, of course, which to me that mashup makes more sense because even though they were developed by different studios, which is why it took so long for the combination effort to happen, the universe those are set in is very similar to one another. So they're both sci-fi, they're both dealing with space and aliens and that kind of stuff, and evil corporations, and it's a very easy stretch to say, okay, they're in the same universe and roll with it. So So that to me made a lot more sense. That seemed like a match made in heaven. This mashup, I was like, really? They're they're combining these two things but what made it easier in this case is that Robocop Terminator were both released by the same studio, like Orion Pictures, which is now and the rights to which is now held by Amazon MGM.
Yep.
So. It was so they didn't have to go through that years-long struggle and lawyers' battles and royalty agreements or whatever back and forth to make this happen. So anyway, the comic book that came first, which came out in 1992, and then like Virgin Games was interested in making a game based off the comics. They got the license to the comic, but they could not use the comic. But they could not get the comic book, anything related to the comic book itself, such as the plot elements. So all they had the license to was the name, and that's it, pretty much. If you had the other central characters, of course, the Robocop, the Terminator, ED-109, et cetera, et cetera. So given that limitation, Virgin then had Virgin then pretty much had to start from scratch because they could use a comic book for inspiration, but like I said, they were limited. They were limited what they could actually take from it and use it because of the licensing of their restrictions. Yep. So they started developing their own game in house. At the same time, they were doing like a Disney Aladdin. It's been reported. It's been reported in more recent interviews that we usually don't know how much something costs. Because game production costs and whatnot were not very reported on back then as they are now. So oftentimes that knowledge has been lost to time. But we do know now, however, that apparently Virgin paid $2 million for the license. So anyway, they started developing the Genesis version of the game first, and then the other versions of the game were farmed out to other companies to make. Interplay Team Rivet, which was an offshoot of the Interplay company, made the Super NES version of the game. Interplay had already been associated with NES Super NES games before in the past. We talked about them in the podcast before, so they had some experience with trying to handle console versions like this. NMS Software handled the Game Gear and Mega System versions, and Expert Development handled the Game Boy version. So Genesis, Super NES, and Super NES versions all came out first, December of 1993. They all came out in Europe. I thought for some reason the Super NES version of this game took 2 years to come out in Europe. They didn't get the European release until August of '95. Why that long delay? I don't know. Master System version was, of course, Europe only because the system was pretty much dead in North America by that point. Game Gear in 1993, North America and Europe. Game Boy also was North America and Europe in 1994. So. Probably not surprised then that different companies were handling the game. That you have significant differences between the Super NES and Genesis versions of the games. So, because I guess they're able to get the permission from. I guess Interplay got the permission for Virgin, being like, okay, since you're developing it from the ground up on your system, you have permission to do your own thing because. You did see that occasionally in these days, but more than not, there was a drive to, okay, we want the same game for the same platform so nobody gets offended. So this is a rare case of the two versions being very different from one another. I mean, not radically different. There is a lot in common between them. And, so I'm going to ask Joe to talk about them in just a second here because he has experience with the Genesis version of the game, as just said. But, there are differences. There's plot differences. There's gameplay differences, which go above and beyond the usual, okay, graphics and music are going to be different, Super NES versus Genesis. Control schemes are going to be different, Super NES versus Genesis, that kind of stuff. So it goes above and beyond that. And one more thing for segue. Genesis version of the game has historically been rated higher than the Super NES version of this game, and some modern reviews are kind of poking back at that, saying Super NES version of the game is actually better than people have always felt it was. But the general consensus has always been Genesis version of the game is superior. So now that you play both of them, Joe, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So since I focused mainly on the gameplay differences of the Genesis version, I actually want to hold that off until after we talk about the Super Nintendo version.
Sure, that's fine.
But what I would like to talk about, since I have about a paragraph and a half of it, is about the comic book, just the plot and whatnot. But so, as Greg mentioned, that was created in 1992, published by Dark Horse. 2 years after the Alien vs. Predator. So Alien vs. Predator was an idea that they had kicked around. It was a gamble. They didn't even know if it was going to succeed. It blew up, and they got Frank Miller, who had already had experience of writing for Robocop. He actually had a completed script for Robocop 2 and 3 that unfortunately were not used. God, I would love to see those films.
That I never knew. Yeah, that would have been awesome because, like, Frank Miller was behind Sin City, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And 300.
Yeah, I love that movie. So, 300 too. Yep, that's right. Yeah, both of them very good movies.
Yeah. So anyways, they had a single RoboCop comic book miniseries that they had done, which was written by Frank Miller. And that was actually pretty much an adaptation of his screenplays that were basically denied by Orion. Amazing series. Anyways, so that brought us here to Robocop versus Terminator. The story shows us an alternate take on the future war between humans and machines that we all know. Skynet became self-aware, deemed mankind the enemy, and launched an all-out assault against them. But the comic explains that Cyberdyne Systems used the technology of Robocop to create the Skynet CPU, at least the human side of it, combined with the ability to interface with other machines, is what allowed Skynet to obtain the sentience and a resistance, which is amazing. Great use of lore that was already there and just expanding upon it. So basically, soldiers were sent back in time to kill Robocop, so this way Cyberdyne couldn't exist. This obviously causes Terminators to be sent back to protect Robocop. And Murphy's consciousness would be uploaded into Skynet's network, but he would hide within it, like replicating his mind until several decades into the future. He's basically able to build himself a new body in a Terminator factory, and later several more duplicates to take the fight to Skynet. In the end, Robocop covers himself in a shapeless blob of synthetic flesh and basically goes back in time to destroy the Cyberdyne satellite in space that would become Skynet, and prevent the future from, being what it was. Great use of both sides of the franchise's lore. I love the way that they piece this together. I thought, especially for the time and rereading this now, that using Robocop as the link that gives Skynet, like, its power, it was genius. They did such a good job with this. I love the comic series. And I was glad to share that with you because, like, I
never read it before. So,
I knew back in the day, like, from when I originally read it, like, it was a great series. I love this series. And when you had said that you hadn't read it, I was like, well, I got to at least share it with you. Even if you didn't talk about it, you definitely needed to read it. So.
Yeah, I was surprised by how good it was. I didn't know Frank Miller was involved with it, so that knowing that now, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it was very good, very well animated. It's like like I said before, I had reservations about the whole Terminator versus Robocop thing, but I thought the comic book did a pretty good job of explaining it because it's like, and this is something we're going to talk about in the game too. It's like, on paper, Robocop should not be a challenge for Terminators. Terminators seem like 10 times stronger than he is. So I thought the comic book did a pretty good job of handling that question. So, which is also a problem that the game had to handle too. So, we definitely are going to talk about that. But so I think that making a game based upon the comic book was definitely a good idea because it's like, it's a very especially in the '90s, like these properties, when these properties were still like very super hot and we're still having fresh movies come out on a regular basis. It was a very, good playground for like a video game to come out of this.
Yeah.
But like it's a shame the license version. It's a shame that the license that the version got was so limited. I think I think a version could have. I think a version could have gotten the whole kit and caboodle and just made a straight comic book to video game adaptation. That would have been amazing. But
yes.
as it was, they had to take. As it was, they had to take what they got, and they still, spoiler, I think they still did a pretty good job with what they had, because after all, it's like, it's like pure action platformer, shoot 'em up. Like, what's not to like? It's like, the formula is solid, and like, there's some human elements. Human elements, like human characters that are, missing from the game that were present in the comic book, et cetera, et cetera. But, so speaking about comic, I guess is a good time to mention as always. The Superman version of the game also includes like comic book style cutscenes between missions, which also helps tell the story. So. Not the best animated. I thought they could have been animated like a bit better, but story, it was still very nice to see the story being told to you in that format. They really did try hard to remind you that this is an adaptation from a comic book.
Yeah.
So, and I thought the overall presentation package on that was very well done.
Yep, I agree. So this game is your typical, well, I shouldn't say typical. It is a side-scrolling platforming.
It is typical in some ways and not typical in others. So I think that's probably
and I mean not typical as in like what you'd expect a Robocop game to be. So when you see Robocop, the minute I remember one of the reasons I got this game was because it said Robocop, and I immediately thought of the arcade games, and you're just walking left and mainly to the right, and shooting, and there is no platforming. So platforming was kind of nice here. I mean, I'll get into it as we get into it, but like, so you can shoot in several directions, which is nice. And even while you're hanging, which is one of the things I wanted to talk about down the line, which you can, it's fundamental. Like, if you're going to get anywhere in this game, that is fundamental. You collect different weapons, and you can collect Robocop heads, which give you extra lives. You'll especially need them in those hanging levels. Again, we'll get into that. You can also get a shield that can help. I found the shield to be kind of rare. You catch it every once in a while, but it definitely wasn't like a normal power up. The weapons you can get are missile launcher, flamethrower, bazooka. You can get like a machine gun, and then even cooler is when you battle Ed 209, you can blow off his Gatling gun and actually pick it up and use it against him, which is amazing. So you're Robocop, you're fighting against Skynet. For the most part, you're going to be encountering Terminators and robots of that such. There are some human interactions. I didn't think that they really came across a lot. I felt like you were more fighting the robots than anything else.
Yeah.
Most of this game is very satisfying. It feels like you're shooting people. You kind of get that tactile feedback by seeing everything there with the sound effects and all that. The hanging mechanic is probably the biggest hurdle you're going to come across in this game, outside of the bosses being bullet sponges. I found the hanging to be hit or miss. It's definitely something that takes time. You have to learn it. But once you get it, it's not so bad. And like I said, you can shoot in all directions while you're hanging, which helps out a lot. And the bosses being bullet sponges, I think, hurt this game more than anything else. It just felt like, and don't get me wrong, like I agree, this is a great game. They did such a good job with this game. But I felt at times that the bosses should have fallen a long time ago. And it just made it tedious. That being said, there are some difficult parts that are going to be not for the faint of heart, mainly those hanging levels. You can take some hits here and there, but you're still going to die a lot. I guarantee you that. I ended up personally using infinite lives because,
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was falling down holes. So, like I said, it took me a while to get used to the hanging stuff. But yeah, I mean, using infinite lives, I was able to get through it. So, thank God for the Game Genie. So,
would it surprise you to hear at all that the main inspiration for this game, the developers admitted that the developers of the game admitted they took a lot of inspiration and ideas from a game they love, Contra 3, the Alien Wars?
No, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Nope.
Yeah, I mean,
you definitely could feel that.
Exactly. I was gonna say this very much feels like a Contra game. And one of the first differences between the Super Nintendo and the Genesis version that I'll mention now before I hand it over to Greg to give his opinions of the game. Here in the final boss, Skynet is made up of these electric bolts that form a face. Pretty cool. Unfortunately, the Genesis, you just get a giant lazy T-800 head. Yeah. So needless to say, I prefer the final boss here on the Super Nintendo. But, we'll get more into the Genesis differences here after Greg gives his opinion.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Because, not only the story differences, there's also, gameplay differences. Gameplay differences between the two versions as well, too. And, one of the most obvious ones, the difference is that, the blood or the lack thereof.
Yes.
Because Nintendo's restrictions at the time, Super NES version of the game has none of the blood and gore that the Genesis version was famous for. The developers also said that they were 22 years old when they made this game. They wanted as much blood and gore in the game as possible.
Of course.
So the Genesis version of the game has that in spades.
Yep.
Obviously, you don't have the Super NES version of the game. That's one big gameplay difference.
Yeah, that's a huge difference too, because when you shoot a guy in the Genesis game, they pretty much explode in a pool of blood. It's pretty graphic, and represents the comic very well. So yeah, not
from
having,
what I saw. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say not having that in the Super Nintendo game was kind of but it doesn't take away from the overall game. So I will give them props for that.
I also, speaking about not having, from what I saw, the Genesis version of the game didn't have the comic book style cutscenes.
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So, there also was a very strange single FPS stage in this game as well too, which I don't know why they included that. Because it's a very short blink and you miss it.
Yeah.
It's I liked it, but I'm also why is this here if you're not going to use more of it? It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It just felt very out of place. So, but yeah, so gameplay wise, like I said before, there is both unique and non-unique things with this game. The gameplay is very standard, typical, platformer, go up and down ladders, make jumps, blast enemies, bosses are difficult to take down, et cetera, weapons, health system, you've seen it all before. Yep. But again, like I said before, I thought they did a great job styling and capturing the look and feel of both the movies and the comic book here with this game. The graphics, I think, are a mixed bag. I think on the bright side, I think they are overall very good. The sprites look great. The Robocops, the Terminators, they all look excellent. So there's some very cool transparent lighting effects and foreground scrolling in certain areas. The outdoor backgrounds are very eye-catching. They're very sharp and defined in many areas. However, and again, I'm trying not to give too much fault on this point because I understand they're capturing the feel of the comic book. It's the future, the world's largely destroyed. You have a lot of obviously there's going to be a lot of areas ruined, but the stages. I understand the fact that looks. So I understand the game's going to look very, a lot of like background ruined areas, et cetera, et cetera. But the stages all kind of look very similar to me. So I understand that they're trying to capture the comic book feel, but they could have differentiated a little bit at least, because it's like a lot of areas just have like very. While there's sharp detail, the color, the sharp detail in this game, the colors used are used are very bland and limited. I thought so. I thought they could have done a little bit better in that area, unfortunately. But overall though, I thought graphically the game was more positive than negative. I thought as far as like trying to capture the overall look, the comic book and whatnot. Music overall I thought was pretty good too. It doesn't have the voice samples the Genesis version did for some reason. I mean, like they could have included them. Why? I don't know. They didn't. They took them out. But the very synthesized guitar / rock feel that the soundtrack has is very appropriate for both movies franchises. I thought
definitely.
And the sound effects are all great. They're all clear, nice and appropriate. So, what was your thoughts about the graphics and music?
Yeah, I thought the music was good. I think the soundtrack serves both franchises very well. The graphics I thought were good. They had big, detailed sprites. You know what you're shooting at. The background, this would be a good point to point out a difference with the Genesis. I thought the Genesis backgrounds were a little bit better. I felt like it was almost like copy and paste for the Super Nintendo. Like just kind of put like a darkish, foreboding background. But the foreground, the Super Nintendo wins because they got like the human skulls, like when you're in the future and whatnot, which was really good. That was a detail that was definitely missing from the Genesis game, but yet pops here. And I agree. Like the lack of voice samples was kind of disappointing because I was expecting that and was looking forward to hearing how that was going to sound, and we just didn't get that. As far as the differences with the Genesis and Super NES game, it really comes down to the gameplay more than anything else.
That's where I was going to go into next. Because it's like I only you have experience playing both. I only watched the Genesis version in action. So hopefully you can expand upon this for me. But gameplay wise, again, there's pros and cons. I can see why Genesis version of the game historically is ranked higher than the Super NES version of the game, because Genesis version of the game obviously plays faster, faster processor. Yep. They're able to they do that. The Genesis version of the game also looks like it features more enemies on screen at once, which is like Super NES can handle multiple. Super NES can handle this. Why they felt the need to reduce the enemies on screen of the Super NES version of the game, I don't know. It seemed like a conscious choice, maybe help make the game run faster, compensate for the slower processor, whatever. The Genesis version of the game is faster paced overall. Overall, the Genesis version of the game just looks a bit more exciting. However, the conversion of that, the Genesis version of the game also looks a lot harder than the Super NES version of the game is. So, because the Super NES version of the game, you're not facing those relentless volleys of unavoidable shots coming at you on a regular basis.
Right.
Like all the enemies attacking you. So, I mean, it is hard, but it looks like the Genesis version of the game is still much harder because of all that. So it's more a case of like, what do you want? What kind of challenge level do you want in your game? Because I don't think because again, I don't think the differences. There really are differences. I guess I'll say this now. I was going to say this. I wasn't going to say this for final thought, but I will probably now. because the games are so different, they're different. I think if you're a fan of both franchises, both these games are worth playing because the differences between them are different enough in terms of story, in terms of gameplay, whatever. That's worth playing both of them. But if you want to start with one of them, what version you start with, I think, depends upon: do you want a more frantic, fast, maybe unfair, challenging game, or do you want a more slower, methodical, like paced game? Because it's like again, it kind of both franchises, I think, kind of have evidence for this, because it's like the RoboCop movies tend to be a bit more slower paced, methodical. RoboCop, going through a factory to shooting guys up slowly, methodically, that kind of stuff. That kind of, that kind of mirrors Super NES game. Terminator, like frantic gunfights, battles against all kinds of like weaker enemies, but enemy coming at you from all directions, like the stock Terminators. That kind of fits the Genesis feel more. It's almost more like one game fits the movie franchise better because of the programming differences.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And the one thing that does help the Genesis version, because you are right, it is faster. Enemies definitely come at you more. You're dodging, the hits a little bit more than you are on the Super Nintendo. Genesis has a weapon that literally vaporizes enemies. The laser weapon is amazing, and it's only available in the Genesis version. I don't know if...
Interesting.
I'm wondering if they stripped that out because of the slower pace of the Super Nintendo.
They could have, yes.
So that's possible. The only other difference that I haven't mentioned yet of these two games is each game, and each as in Genesis or Super Nintendo, I don't know if the portable platforms had the same thing. They each have two unique bosses. So there's two bosses you won't find in the Super Nintendo game, and there's two bosses you won't find in the Genesis game. And yeah, I mean, other than that difference, you're pretty much almost getting the same presentation here. And it's funny that, we talked about the speed and everything else, because it really felt like it was not only Robocop versus Terminator, but it was Genesis versus Super Nintendo, which it always was on the playground, but we're actually seeing it here in game, in game execution as well. Yeah. And I don't think, other than like Aladdin, that there was ever another game that really kind of made that argument.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, it is interesting that Virgin was developing both this game and Aladdin at the same time, because both those games were made very different for both systems.
Right.
So, so it's kind of ironic that they were in development at the same time. But no, talk about the versions real quick. From when I saw them like on YouTube, the Master System and Game Gear versions are just like watered down versions. The Genesis version and the Game Boy version is just a watered down version of Super NES version.
Okay.
So,
all right. So not missing anything.
They play all right. Yeah, they play all right. The reviews at the time were pretty good for them, actually. But but obviously they had to make sacrifices like the 16-bit cousins. But
right.
And also, the only 16-bit RoboCop game available was RoboCop 3, which came out later on, and the less said about that game, the better. So,
so
because,
true.
Yeah, but anyway, well, I mean, the movie wasn't great either, so unfortunately,
right.
but yeah, but anyway, so so I can understand the Genesis version of this game historically being considered the better of the two games. I also can understand the people arguing now that the Super NES version games better. People have is better than Super NES version of the game is better than what people have said about it over the years. So I am curious to play Genesis version of the game myself, definitely at some point. I just didn't I didn't do this for the podcast because I'm like, well, Joe's experience with it. I don't need to to do that, but I definitely am interested in checking this out because overall, I like this game. I was dubious going into this as about how well the two franchises could mix, but I thought the comic book and the game both did a very good job of trying to explain, tying together the story and the characters, whatnot, and making it work.
Yeah.
In a pretty fun, innovative way. So, is it the best shooter on the system? No, but it's a very, as far as I didn't want to call it well, I mean, I will call it a licensed game because it's a licensed game. It's just not a licensed game from a movie or TV shows you historically think about. It's licensed from a comic book. And like, I know that the games that were, I know that the games that came directly out of comic books. I mean, obviously you have the whole Marvel and DC line.
Right,
I'm just saying,
right.
those already were movies and TV shows before the video games ever came out. This is like, I'm trying to think about another game that went directly from comic book to video game, and. I know there's got to be some out there. I just can't think of any other examples like right now, off the top of my head.
Yeah, there's a bunch of examples. I can think of what's it? Wildcats was one of them.
Never heard of that one.
But so here's the thing, though. I think a lot of the comic book ones that I'm thinking of, yeah, they were from Image Comics, like Spawn. But I also think, some of those were also getting cartoons at the time, and the games were more based on the cartoons than the comic books, and that could be debated, till the sun comes up. But there's definitely other games out there. We'll eventually get to some of them, so stay tuned.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, but anyway, so I thought they did a very good job considering the license that they got was limited to begin with. I thought they did a very good job, of conveying the look and feel of the comic book like this video game. So both video games, Genesis, and Super NES.
Yeah.
So, overall, Joe, which version did you end up enjoying like a bit more as far as this game goes?
See, there's different things I like about each one. So I'm gonna stick with the Genesis version just for the simple fact that there's very little platforming there. Those hanging sections kind of really ticked me off. Super Nintendo version.
They're the hardest.
It's like all of a sudden you just kind of hit a wall. So yeah, I'm gonna have to go with the Genesis version there, but it's not by much. It's not by much.
Yeah. So also, typical playthrough of this game is about an hour long. So there are some cheat codes for this game we'll talk about here toward the end. There's also a very goofy hidden credit sequence Easter egg at the game after you beat it. Did you see that?
I did not.
Yeah, check it out on YouTube. It's pretty fun.
Okay.
It's like a programmer twist on things. So,
okay, nice.
Nicely included. So, overall, the reviews in this game were very positive, regardless of what platform that came out on. Like I said before, Genesis version of the game did rank higher, but the Super NES version of the game still ranked a pretty respectable, still ranked okay. EGM gave it 5.8 out of 10, which I think was a little bit harsh, but overall, not a horrible score. Computer Video Games gave it a much better 88, out of 100. Just to give a couple of examples there. So, I thought the game sold well, but eBay does not support that because copies on eBay are kind of few and hard to find and go for a lot of money, which we'll talk about here later on here. So, maybe the Super NES version of the game just didn't sell as well compared to the Genesis version of the game.
Maybe.
But but like I said, the game reviewed well. It seemed like it would sell very well based upon the properties. So the only thing I could count, the only thing I'd see counting against it was look at the game came out in late '93. It was released in a very already crowded run and gun action shooter scene. So maybe, and also how many people. I don't know how many kids had read the comic book series either beforehand, but we're just assumed it was going to be bad because of previous licensed games. But
that's what I was thinking. Just burned too many times by different licensed games.
It could be, yeah. So, but anyway, yeah. So which is unfortunate because I said this is a very pleasant surprise. It was a fun game.
Yeah.
So, but obviously because that same licensing issue has not been re-released. So, they probably could if they want to. You said that Dark Horse did the comic. They're still around today.
Yep.
If they want to, Amazon MGM could probably strike a deal with them to release the game. So, But I also saw a mention about there being later comic books also based upon the setting.
Believe me, they went. I think there's like 4 different miniseries that basically kind of continue the storyline. So yeah.
Oh, that much, huh?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, but yeah, I'll have to check those out too because I'm curious. Like I said before, I was doubtful as to how well this tie-in would work, but actually the tie-in works better than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
So, because like I said, Alien vs Predator seemed like a natural tie-in made in heaven, whereas like this one they had to actually kind of jerry-rig it into place somehow, but somehow they did it. But anyway, yeah. So, so very impressive game, very much worth playing if you're a fan of the franchises, like you're a fan of this kind of gameplay style. Definitely worth checking out. Like I said, physical copies are a little bit harder to find, but you always can go the emulation route if you have to, because you probably should because this game looks worth playing for sure. Yeah. So we mentioned some codes beforehand. The Unlimited Lives code is a code that Joe mentioned. It's not an official code. It's more like of a Game Genie / Sheeting device code. What is available? There is one code available. There's one code available Super NES version of this game, and this is how to unlock that special Easter egg credit scene at the end. During the credits, just push B to see it. So,
okay.
The game. We didn't mention this. The game uses passwords, so you are able to use passwords to progress the game, and it also jumps to the ending as well. If you at the ending as well, if you just want to see it. There is a bug you can. There is a bug that you can exploit in this game that The fact that it requires a button push combination to use, and the fact it requires a button push combination to use makes me think that the developers put this into the game during the development for playtesting purposes and never took it out for whatever reason. So the bug is when climbing up the ladder, if you hold X and A at the same time, as long as you keep holding those buttons, Robocop will just keep climbing up the ladder and it'll go all the way into the sky.
That's awesome.
Once you're there, you're able to walk around. You're able to do shortcuts. So the shortcuts have their stages. You're basically able to break the game in several ways. So, like I said, I suspect this was a debug tool that they put in the game while development, and for some reason never took it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a cool thing to exploit for sure. So I mentioned eBay. Maybe Joe, if you have a second, I'd be curious to know this. Be able to look it up. What Genesis versions of this game go for these days? Because Super NES versions of the game, it's not super rare. You can find them. You can find them on eBay, but the choices are limited, and you got to be prepared to pay. Cart prices are not that bad, but CIB, I think, because that very cool box design this game uses, are very expensive. So I found when you research this recently, there were 7 copies of this game listed on eBay, with only 4 copies of the game sold recently, which are not always games I'll talk about here in just a second. So not the rarest game we've covered before in the podcast, but it definitely is harder to find on eBay for sure. For, like I said, for whatever reason, maybe because it's just a popular franchise, maybe like I said, I assume the game would have sold pretty well, but these numbers don't really support that theory. But so the 4 sold. 2 of the 4 sold were boxes only, which again shows how much demand that the boxes are. As I said, the Super NES boxes are very cool looking. These boxes sold anywhere for these 2 boxes only sold for $90 and $120. So the box price alone gives you an idea of how much a CIB copy runs for. So. 1 cart version only sold for $27. 1 CIB copy sold for $240. So you're probably better off marrying a box to a cart if you want to go that route. But you should have tracked down the manual, unfortunately, and there wasn't any copies of any manuals that sold recently. But you probably get around that problem if you have some patience. But so definitely more expensive game to get in CIB format.
Yeah. So currently 52 listings for the Genesis version. Looks like people are asking between, $75 on the high end, like $40 on the low end, but that's all pretty much complete in box.
Okay.
There's a couple cart only for like $40. Let's see, recently sold, we have 65 complete in box for $83, $70, cart only for $30, $42. So generally the same price range.
Oh, cool. So that supports my theory. The Genesis version of the game is cheaper.
And people who were either smart enough to get the Mega Drive version imported over, or acquired it while they were overseas, whatever, that copy, there's only one on eBay, and I didn't see any sold. $300. So granted, that's somebody asking, but also like, man, they use like metallic, like hollow foil, like paper for that cart. Like it looks premium and amazing. So I understand where that value would come from, because that's almost as collectible as the box for the Super Nintendo. So totally get it.
Right. Yeah.
And I second what you said. This game should be played. I don't care what version you play, honestly. I think both are a great experience. They offer different experiences, so keep that in mind. Definitely emulate it. I mean, I put in my notes, like, the cart is obviously going to be collectible just for that box alone. So if you're a collector, I don't know, if you play your collection, just get a cart. That's what I would tell you. If you're a completionist that just wants to look at shiny boxes on a shelf, get the premium box, obviously. But either way, definitely play and, emulate.
Alrighty then. Thank you again as always for playing. Playing with us, obviously, but listening to us as well too. That, but obviously I got a game on the brain still. But next time on the podcast, we have another guest host lined up. He has not been on the podcast before. He goes by Thrack Online. Super nice guy. So I've known him for 3-4 years in various servers and stuff like online. So I know he runs several podcasts. I'm sure he'll be happy to plug those. But he's apparently a wrestling fan too. How much wrestling fan he is, I'm actually not sure. Maybe not as much of a wrestling fan as you, Joe. Although I could be surprised by that. But yeah, so. We have been putting off covering any of the very impressive Superpower Pro Wrestling games up to this point. So we've invited him to on the podcast to talk about that with us. So look forward to that episode next time. So
good stuff.
I played some of the modern games the franchise. I've not franchise. I think this is the very. I think this everybody has versions. The version is very like the very first game. So it'll be interesting to go back to the roots.
Yeah, I don't 100% think it's the first game, but I want to say it's the first game that introduced a lot of the mechanics that have carried over to the more modern games.
Okay. Yeah. Because the most recent game the franchise just came out. The most recent game the franchise just came out a few years ago, I think.
Well, the one that came out,
because I see it on Steam on a regular basis.
Yeah. That's why I was looking, because I own the game on Steam. Come on, Fire Pro Wrestling. December of 2017, so almost 10 years now.
Longer than I thought, yes.
Yeah.
So,
but, it's been a while, but they, for the first 3 years, they really did a good job supporting it. The company did a good job supporting it. Yeah. If you have it on Steam, that game there's a reason there's a 10-year gap. They don't need to release another game. They released a masterpiece, And then, of course, they allowed the Steam community to just go crazy. So, yeah, I mean, the game already boasted, I think, a roster of like over 100 wrestlers. With the community behind it, I think I have over 1,000 wrestlers I could choose from. It's ridiculous. And then, of course, you can build custom rings and all that. It gets crazy. So, it's actually the one reason I prevented myself from buying it for the modern consoles, because you're not going to get the same support. And it's just, I got it on Steam and I'll keep it there.
Yeah, I mean, there are other games that had that support, but it's always nice to see a game that's like that. So, so it's like, the developers are actually encouraging people to make stuff, as opposed to like trying to like DMC them like every turn. Yep. Cough cough Nintendo, cough cough. But anyway, so look forward to that next time. You can find us on Facebook if you want to. You can also send me an email directly to the SNES Podcast yahoo.com. Joe, how can they reach you?
You can find me on my very public Facebook, definitely not family friendly. You can also find me on X at JOESUX 30. And the Twitch thing's still going to happen at some point. I ended up getting, I'll just say, a copy of Mouse PI, which I'll end up getting another copy as soon as I get my first paycheck. But the plan is, once I have a legal copy, I am going to end up probably streaming my gameplay of that, because I am so looking forward. I played it, quite a bit of it already, and it's good enough to where I want to restart it and stream it. So,
sure, makes sense. Okay, yeah, all right, sounds good. As always, thank everybody out there for listening to us. We appreciate it. Thanks again, Joe, as always.
Of course.
Stay safe, everyone. Be well. Catch you again next time. Later, all.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.